Probably the majority of humans on the planet today might approach a payphone, if you could find one, with the very same question. Well, let's begin with a look at the year 1981, where there were 2 space shuttle missions. It's on page 24 of your notebook. We have the very first. So 1981, 2 missions. 1982, there are 3 missions, but you see I'm just going to pause and mention some things about 2 of those missions. So, starting in 1981, you do want to jot down the name of the vehicle. That the first space shuttle of our fleet of orbiters was Columbia, and sticking to the rule that we name the space orbiters after ships of great discovery, certainly it's named after Columbia, and specifically the Captain Gray ship, the Columbia. And here is Columbia, riding atop the jumbo jet there, arriving in Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And this is the mission patch. And the 2 names that you want to jot down as the first crew members for the STS-1 Columbia OV-102 mission of Young and Crippen. The STS means Space Transportation System, as that is in essence what the shuttle was, a taxi, a transportation system to refuel, resupply the crew of the space station. The OV means Orbital Vehicle, and the number assigned for Columbia's 102. And those 2 things happen to be in your Alpha Mix appendix. STS, Space Transportation System, and OV, the orbital vehicle. So the first crew members, Young and Crippen. Crippen over here on the right is the pilot, and he retired and worked at ATK Thiokol in Brigham City for a few years. So some of the engineers, employees at Thiokol had Bob Crippen's autograph on their paychecks. And John Young on the left here, as he was endearingly called the grandfather of astronauts, as he had the most experience. He was admitted into the NASA astronaut class of the 2nd class. He was part of the next 9, and he flew aboard Gemini. He was the first to try out the Titan rocket, and he also was an Apollo astronaut. He walked on the moon, and now as chief of the astronaut office, he went ahead and nominated himself to be the first commander of the shuttle program. He definitely had the experience of trying out new vehicles, the Titan, and had the most amount of hours in space and training at that time. Speaking of training, if the STS-1 mission had launched when it was originally scheduled for in March of 1979, John Young was once quoted as saying that we'd have been launched about half trained. Part of that training is recognizing these controls here. There are 2,214 switches and displays in that cockpit, and that's about 3 times as many as the module. And there are a lot of contingency programs and protocols to be familiar and know. There were 22 manuals that were taken aboard STS-1, each of those about 3 inches thick, together combined weight of 63 pounds. The procedure for an electronics failure from just a cooling system malfunction had 255 steps, for example. So lots of training in this new vehicle. The new vehicle looks very new to you in the sense that if you are familiar with the Space Shuttle program, you tend to think of this main tank as orange. Well, for the first 3 flights, they were actually white. It was done because that's how the original sketches and plans and protocols were, that they would, all the components would be primarily white. And one of the things that they realized was the fact that out of these 4 parts, the one part that was not reusable was the main tank. Now, of course, they knew that beforehand. What they then realized was we don't really need to paint over the insulation. That's what you're directly looking at, that orangey color. The amount of federal monies that NASA receives is very much different than the Apollo era, and so it was quickly recognized this is a means in which we can save money. Certainly a bit of savings can be had from not having to consume thousands of gallons of paint to create the aesthetically pleasing look of all four components being mostly white in appearance. For those of us that grew up as space exploration fanatics in the time period where the shuttle was a new vehicle for us, we got associated in our minds through the first 3 launches that the main tank was white. And even though there were a total of 135 shuttle launches, it still to this day seems odd for me to see the orange, equally as odd as it probably is for you to see this white tank. Here's the rollout from the Vehicle Assembly Building of STS-1, Columbia. And heading up on the platform, mobile launch platform, aboard the crawlers, and take up to this platform ready to await launch. The gantry, the white room where the astronauts have their final checks and then enter aboard the shuttle orbiter. And the orbiter will sit out for a few nights as they run through all the checks and procedures. So you get these great shots of the shuttle while it is waiting for launch day. And again, it probably seems odd to you in appearance with the main tank being white. But for me, it's like, oh, the good old days. Young and Crippen, Young over there, Crippen here, preparing for their launch, which occurred on the 12th of April, 1981. That is a date you do want to jot down in your notebook, 12th of April, 1981. Hopefully many of you recognize the date of 12th of April. 12th of April, 1961, 20 years before. That is the anniversary of the first human who left our planet, looked down at our planet, saw its beauty, came back home safely to tell us about it. Yuri Gagarin, 12th of April, 1961. It is 20 years on the anniversary. This wasn't done on purpose. The original scheduled date was a day or two before. I think it was the 10th of April. But there was a computer software patch in one of the program's timings that needed to be done, so it was delayed. So it wasn't an intentional thing, but I'm sure it worked out nicely for the first ever reusable spacecraft to launch on the anniversary of Yuri Gagarin becoming the first human to travel to space and back safely. Many of you probably haven't even seen a launch of a shuttle footage of, and so we're going to show you this footage of the very first ever launch of the space shuttle.
Minus 40 seconds and counting. The development flight instrumentation recorders are on. T-minus 35 seconds. We're just a few seconds away from switching to the redundant sense sequencer. T-minus 27 seconds. We've gone for redundant set sequencer start. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've run from the engine.
Super indeed. Some still shots of the ascent. Remember, as you are in this phase on the launch pad, your mission is controlled by Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Then as soon as you've cleared the tower, the mission control transfers over to Houston in Texas. Very first time that we were able to see the external tank fall away, and they will break up a bit in the atmosphere, land in the ocean. It's only part of the vehicle or the Space Shuttle program vehicle system that isn't reused. It would not be economically efficient to really try and hunt these down, and as you can see, they get quite a bit of abuse on their journey upward into space. When they get into orbit, they open up those payload bay doors to evacuate some of that built-up energy, and then maybe expend their own built-up energy having sat on the launch pad for hours and hours and hours. Crippen here, having some fun with weightlessness. John Young certainly can attest to the more roomy spacecraft with the orbiter than previous modules and capsules with NASA. After 2 days, they return home, and the commander is actually the one that lands the orbiter. You would think the pilot, but the pilot's responsible for the takeoff, so Commander Young is operating the vehicle here. Remember, acts as a glider. Super indeed. So while that clip was playing, I was looking up to see how many gallons of paint the external tank would have required, and found a number of 600 pounds for the amount of paint, and that was more the driving force to change the process of not painting it, because less weight is going to require less fuel, so more savings invested there, and that was the primary reason for the less weight at liftoff. And then also discovered in my quick glance and reading there that it was the first 2 shuttle missions that had the white tanks only, not 3 as I think I said earlier. And that just shows the power and the influence of the posters in my bedroom as I was growing up with all the prototype pictures of the shuttle upcoming mission program, and how they were all in white, and just those first 2 launches being so impactful, and watching those and just having that image burned in my mind. Here is Young at the base of the steps, and Crippen coming down the steps. Now this maximum capacity 4 persons is actually for the mobile stair platform, not for the orbiter vehicle there. Lots of analysis done about this vehicle, and things went very smoothly. Technically, in the first Columbia mission report, it said there were 70 anomalies, and that might seem like a high number, but think about everything from liftoff to the 2-day flight, re-entry. Now, of course, the ideal would be 0. One of the things in the report was how Cripp mentioned that he saw some white chunks during the liftoff phase hitting the side, and they think that was like some of the paint. So another reason not to paint the external tank, the non-reusable part of the shuttle program. So here, as you can see, and you've been looking at, we have clearly there are tiles that are missing. The engineers knew that some tiles would be missing, but they didn't expect to have quite so many tiles missing. So that was an issue that certainly was looked at very carefully and adjusted and fixed. This right here happens to be the hatch where the astronauts would enter the vehicle and likewise exit. And the tiles, a very innovative process step in TPS, thermal protection system. So here's a model of Columbia that was in a wind tunnel test to help determine that dissipation of the energy. And of course the tile is essential because even though that black base of the orbiter is the primary thermal protection system, some of that plasma and that heat definitely is going to hit the sides of the vehicle, so definitely would want to protect that. Now these shuttle tiles are just crazy. When I had the opportunity to teach at Box Elder High School, I had access to an engineer who would bring in for the space explorations class one of these tiles, just big piece, and would set it aflame essentially with a butane tank or butane lighter and get these things to just over 2,000 degrees, and you could instantly, just as these people here, touch them and your fingertips wouldn't be burnt. You wouldn't even really feel that this was hot at all. So the space shuttle tiles, very, very impressive indeed. STS, Space Transportation System 1, in the record books. Speaking of record books, continuing in our Race for Space records, not so much Race for Space, but still running through major moments in space exploration history. And the STS-1 mission marks the first non-capsule, a spaceplane type of an orbiter to reach space, and certainly that is for the United States with Columbia.